We've been talking about developing a healthy escape plan and what does it mean to be careful or to take heed or to watch ourselves. Today we're going to continue that conversation and get a little bit more practical on what do boundaries look like? What are the boundaries, the people, places, and things we need to be focusing on to help us in moving toward developing a healthy escape plan? Well, welcome to Hope and Recovery. This is a Fellowship Celebrate Recovery podcast that focuses on life change to help us with our healing through our mental, spiritual, emotional, and relational health, all based on the Beatitudes that helps us to face our hurts, hangups, and habits so that we can walk in freedom the way Christ intended, under His power, under His authority, through His comfort and strength, as we work through these recovery principles with other grateful believers in Jesus Christ. Hey, I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I struggle with drugs and alcohol and perfectionism. My name is Rodney. I'm the ministry leader here at Fellowship Rogers Celebrate Recovery. And welcome back. Hope you're enjoying this series and trying to find your own story in this process. If you missed the prior podcast, be sure to go check that out. We're talking about developing a healthy escape plan and rooted kind of in that first Corinthians passage where if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. And so we're continuing that and trying to lean into some of the boundaries that we can be thinking about. But I've got my dear brother in Christ, Andy, back with me again to continue this conversation. Andy, welcome back.
Thanks, Rodney. Glad to be here. Hey, y'all. Grateful believer in Jesus, struggle with anxiety, depression, sexual addiction, and grief. My name's Andy.
Hey, Andy. So great conversation on our last podcast. I'm excited to jump back into this. We kind of left it on the be careful in that 1 Corinthians 10, 12, 13. Such a great passage. And one of the things that we just made note of as we were ending that last podcast is the scripture says, but when you are tempted, we will be tempted. So that's acknowledgement, and strength versus wisdom is a big part of that last podcast. Wisdom is just being honest with ourselves that we're going to be tempted, and what are we going to do with the temptation? So I want to move into just real practical then, Andy, just boundaries. Why are boundaries important in recovery?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, especially when we're talking about that whole cycle of what a progression of acting out looks like that we talked about in the last podcast. There are things that happen. There are triggers that hit us in our life that maybe we don't have a whole lot of control over. But I know for me, as I looked at it, my life getting into recovery, I realized that there was a whole lot more in my life that I actually had control over, that I could make proactive decisions about to put me up and to set myself up better, to posture my life so that I could have more success day in and day out. And boundaries are so key to that, and because they help us to mark out safe places in our life. Even when you think about the purpose of a boundary, oftentimes I thought that a boundary was something that I place on something or someone else to keep them away from me. But really, a boundary is what I place around myself so that I can know, hey, anywhere inside this boundary is a safe place. I want to keep the good in, but I want to get some distance from those bad neighborhoods that I don't need to be in.
Yeah. So the narrative, kind of the old mindset of a boundary is telling you need to do this. This is my boundary. You need to do this. You need to stop doing this. But the right way of thinking about it is, if you are going to do this, then I'm going to do this.
Yes.
So it's that language of what am I can only control myself. I can't control the people, places, and things because that's going to be swimming around all the time. It's saying, what am I going to do if those things come into the picture, and how am I going to respond to that? Right?
Yeah.
So just real practically then, we kind of talk about people, places, and things, and kind of identifying those areas that we don't need to go anymore. or be around. So let's unpack that a little bit. What hits your heart as we're kind of talking about that?
Talking about people, places, and things and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I know for me, even now I just think about some of the relationships that I needed to take decisive action to cut off in my life. Some of the places that I loved to be in that I needed to stop going. Some of the things I needed to cut out of my life. Initially, there was a sense of grief and loss with that. Because they were such a huge part of my life, and there was reasons why they were a part of my life.
Right.
But I think for me, I had to understand that it may be a little painful to cut some things out and to put myself in a healthier place. But where I'm at now and what I've been doing has not been getting me what I truly want. And I have to be honest with that. And realize that if I want to pursue health, it's going to take some sacrifice.
Right.
And that's actually a really good thing because God has given me an invitation into living a way better than what I've been living.
Yeah. I think it's good to know, just thinking about those of you listening right now, is just asking yourself the question, am I fully committed to the recovery process? And it is a process. You made a decision. You came into this space, or maybe you're on the fence and you're listening to this, and it's like, I'm on the fence of really making that decision to be fully bought in. And then if I make that decision, then I'm actually committing to the process. And the secret sauce to any commitment is sacrifice. When Jesus says, I will never leave you nor forsake you, that's a really powerful commitment statement. But it's shown and reinforced by his sacrifice. He went to the cross for us. So it's what am I willing to sacrifice? And this can be so tricky because the world will scream, well, life will end without this. Will life, is the party over kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I love when a bunch of recovering addicts go to a restaurant together. And we're laughing and having a good time. And I love to be able to tell the waitress, and we're sober. We don't stop having fun because we're in recovery. In fact, I enjoy life so much more richer. It's just a greater experience when I'm in a clear mind, clean heart. The lie the enemy says is, man, but that's where all the fun is.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's been your experience with that?
Oh, dude, you saying that right there. I remember in college when I was first realizing just even my thought process of like, man, I think I might have a porn addiction after 11 years of using it every day. And for me, it was that feeling of like, who am I going to be without this? What type of stories am I going to tell without this? If I don't have alcohol, how am I going to relate to my friends that I have? And it was a sense of, I'm not going to, okay, great. I'm going to sign myself up for a life of just trying to grind it out and let's be sober because I don't even know why.
Yeah.
But realizing that I didn't understand how much my shame in my struggles and just all of the ramifications of my unhealthy habits were just wrecking my life. And now today, I've been in some of those restaurants with you when the waitress is like, are you guys okay?
Yeah.
But there's so much more life to be experienced when I stop numbing myself out to the fullness of life that Jesus has for us.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how when we think of boundaries seem like a limiting thing. But what's amazing is when I limit the stuff that causes me to jump to those things that numb me out, I actually experience the abundance of life that God has for me.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's so important that we're not just trying to, and this is why this everything we're talking about is not the full plan, right? This is a part of the plan, and the recovery process, the work that you're doing in your step study, the sharing of the hurts, the hangups, the habits, being honest about that, sharing that with God and other people, all of that is important. What we're trying to do is again, stop the bleeding a little bit. If you call me every time you're in the thorn bush, I can't keep you from being stuck with a thorn bush, right? So I need to stay out of the thorn bush or the wrong neighborhood, as we were talking about on a prior podcast, the Proverbs idea of, the strength says I can go hang out in those neighborhoods. Wisdom says stay out of there. You're not going to be able to, you're going to be tempted. So maybe you need to stay out of that. So we're trying to actually help you to experience what it's like to move towards something better. And so that saying, I'm not going to go hang out with those people. If I always find myself drinking around those people, maybe I need to be honest and evaluate. That's a sacrifice. Hey guys, I know that you typically go do this after work. I got to be out.
Yeah.
And it's just not worth it because I know where I'll end up in that place of hopelessness, as we were talking on a prior podcast. The acting out will lead to hopelessness. And at some point, it's like, when is that going to be enough to say, it's not worth it? I can't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and, that's such and I'm sure some folks even hearing that right now in this, as we're talking, as you said, telling our work buddies that we go out with every night after work, telling them, hey, I can't do this right now. As somebody who ran to my addictions because of a feeling that I was unlovable and that I was afraid of being rejected, that triggers a little bit of the, I don't want to. But, man, I had to realize that what I was doing wasn't working.
Right.
And if those people really do care about us, they'll understand.
Yeah. And if they don't, it's that's part of saying, you know what, maybe I need to cut some ties with some people because if they don't care about my sanity and my recovery, they're probably not somebody I need in my life, right? But
absolutely,
if they do love me, you're right, Andy. They're going to understand, and it's gosh, good for you setting a boundary, right? So let's unpack that a little bit. What are some of those boundaries, examples of kind of when we're thinking about places? Right. Yeah. Places that we might need to think about. What's some practical things that we can give our listeners to be thinking about?
Yeah, and that's good. And I think even in this, it's helpful to think through different specific topics or areas of boundaries within your life. And we'll go over some of those in there. One of them in particular is places, like you just said. And so thinking through what those are and knowing that the list we give you, it's not going to be exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination.
Trying to get your thinking a little bit. Yep.
And so like places, for me, what I think of is like specific restaurants, specific stores, areas of town, places that I know if I go there, there is a very, very high likelihood that I'm going to run into some sort of a trigger there.
Yeah.
That it's going to be a trigger and there's going to be opportunity for me to act out. And so I don't go to bars anymore because I know myself.
Yeah.
My main area of recovery is sexual addiction. I can't hang out outside of Victoria's Secret at the mall.
Or even, and we'll talk a little bit more on the media side of this, but where's places that I'm going? I could probably get away with it maybe a couple times to go sit in a bar. But as I've said before, I'm not there for the peanuts, right? I'm not there. I mean, at some point being in that place, that strength is going to wear out. And it's like, man, all of my desires and stuff are going to come forward. And it's like, man, I'm starting to smell things. I'm starting to hear things. I'm starting to kind of that preoccupation.
Yeah.
And that ritualization. We were talking about this with a group just the other day. If you think about some local, I won't mention the name, but there's local businesses, and the slogan can kind of be, hey, it's all about the rituals. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times in our addictions or our compulsive behaviors, we've developed these rituals. And so it can kind of become this ritualization and fantasy world that's a blink away from acting out. We're not going to be strong when the rituals are kind of taken over.
Yeah.
Preoccupied with the thought, ritualization, and now we're in this place of acting out, which is going to take us to that place of hopelessness, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also good even as we go throughout these areas of boundaries, just know that this is a living document.
Yeah.
You may get into your recovery, and as you're working through this, you realize like, oh, I didn't realize that one sports bar that has a really great burger is actually a trigger for me.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We learn new things about ourselves in there, so write that place down as well. And that's just another thing where you realize, oh, okay, I can't go there too, and that's okay because it's keeping me healthy.
I remember a guy talking about had a gambling problem, and in this casino they had a really good cupcake shop.
As they do.
Bizarre. Yeah. And in his mind, he wasn't going there to gamble, but gambling was his main area of recovery. So he would walk through the casino to go get these cupcakes because he loved the cupcakes. And I still wonder how much of that was just justifying it. We kind of trick ourselves sometimes. But at some point, he had to come to that realization through his sponsor and accountability that, you know what, those are good cupcakes, but they're not worth it. Every time you walk through there and you hear every time you hear the sounds and the smells and all that stuff, your brain's already kind of in that preoccupation. It's releasing those endorphins, and it's like, whew, I'm a step away. So I may be hanging out in the wrong neighborhood. So, hey, going to take a quick break right here. When we come back, we're going to continue talking about boundaries and really developing a healthy escape plan. And what does that look like? People, places, and things we need to be paying attention to. When we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Hey, friends, we always want to encourage you. If you're on the fence about this process we call recovery, please consider just maybe bring some friends and come check us out on a Friday night. Maybe you want to bring your community group just to see what it's all about. You never know who might be hurting in your church community, in your neighborhood. Just bring somebody and come experience it. We meet on Fayetteville and Rogers campuses, Fellowship, Celebrate Recovery. Go to fellowshipcr.org for more information, and we hope to see you this Friday night. Welcome back. Talking with Andy, and we're talking about boundaries, and we were just talking about just being very honest about those places that we can't go anymore. What about media, Andy? Media is tricky because it's a part of our world. What are some things that we can be thinking about? Again, we look at it through your lens of recovery as we're having this conversation. We're just trying to give you some starters to kind of get you thinking. As you're thinking about your own boundaries, what about media? What's that look like?
Yeah, for me, I've really thought through the types of TV shows and movies that I watched growing up. Me and my wife have a really funny recurring pattern that just from my childhood, some of the movies that I saw, I'm like, oh, that's a great movie. We should go watch it. And then we watch it and we're like, oh my gosh, that had some stuff in there that we didn't need to see. And so realizing that as I get into recovery, like I find myself, there are certain things that I realize that I've been tolerating that really do affect me. And so there were certain sitcoms that I needed to stop watching because there was a lot of sexual tension in it. And it was triggering for me. There were movies that I was tolerating brief nudity in certain movies. And I'm like, I can't just appreciate the film here. And another one to think through as well, and this is, I especially see this with younger guys nowadays, are video games. It's amazing how we can use video games, TV, movies to numb us out. And even if we aren't doing our main area of acting out, it can put us in a kind of a numbed out space where we're more susceptible to temptation.
Yeah. Well, and be clear too. I mean, and I know you're not saying this, so I just want to say that someone may be thinking it. It's okay to play video games. What we want you to do is think about, how is this affecting you, right? So even if there's not, let's say your area is sexual addiction. Maybe you're not watching anything that is specifically tied to that.
Yeah.
But every time I play these kind of video games, I find myself wandering to other things, right? So it can kind of be a gateway, so to speak, right?
Well, and just to get really practical on that one in particular, it's the same thing that, you know, I often tell guys, like, if you're taking a day off to rest, there's a big difference between playing whatever video game you want for 12 hours straight and not leaving the couch.
Right.
And, you know, having 30 minutes to an hour, you're playing that, and then you're going and doing other things that are productive.
Right.
It's just like if I sit and watch Netflix all day,
Yeah.
it's restful up to a point.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, it can put me in a rough headspace where I'm more susceptible because I look at myself and I go, man, I just wasted this day.
Yeah. Well, and this will tie with the social media here in
Yeah.
a minute, but even just thinking about our phones and just what kind of protections do I need on my phone? And, you know, there's some sacrifices with that. I know a brother that cut off his internet on his phone.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man, how do you live? And you know what? He's done that for a while now, and he's actually doing pretty well.
Yeah.
It's just making that sacrifice is coming to that realization. If I'm doing this, it's going to lead to that. So what
Well,
about
here? One other thing with media that I just popped in my mind: music. There are certain songs that I listen to in my stuff that I can't listen to anymore because
Right.
they put me in a weird headspace. And
Yeah.
so that's another thing. What am I putting in my mind in that area?
What about people? As we're thinking through that, what does that practically look like?
Yeah, for me, it looked like who were the people that I normally drank with, and I knew that that's all that they wanted to do. And not that I don't love those people or care about them, but like if we think through some of the people that we hang out with, we can be honest that there's some people that, you know, it's just a pattern thing.
Yeah.
That if I hang out with them, chances are this thing is going to go down.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important too, again, it's important to just see how this all connects. It may be people that have nothing to do with your addiction. They may
Yes.
not drink. They may not watch all that stuff. But they're the kind of people that maybe it's just really, really negative people. And you know, if you hang, and this is what's tricky about family. So we may have to limit their access to our heart.
Yes.
So we go into those conversations, not opening ourselves up. So I have, you know, we're having Christmas, whatever, Thanksgiving. I know that I need to go by there, but I have to protect my heart and make sure that I don't get kind of trapped in this conversation that's going to spin me out and I feel bad about myself. And then I'm just in this vulnerable place. Now those lies and temptations start to come in. So it's evaluating people connected with your area of recovery, but also being mindful of the kind of people that tend to spin you out and put you in a bad headspace kind of a thing.
Yeah. And it seems like there's a pattern with all of these boundaries is that it's not necessarily I'm not going to go to the bar because that's where I act out. It's also what are the places that lead to me wanting to go to
Right.
the bar? What are those people that lead to me wanting to do that? And realizing that when we're tempted, there's been other things that have happened that has led us to that point.
Exactly. Yeah. So social media, that's a big one, right?
Yeah, man. I think for me, it's just straight up knowing that there are certain social media sites that I just can't be on.
Yeah.
And it's just not healthy for me, and I can't trust myself with it.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
But how do I stay connected with my friends and my family, right? That's how
Man,
I do that.
you know,
And
what's
that's a common one that I hear.
That is a common one. Well, so here's what I do. It's not like I have no social media.
Yeah.
I've got a filtering app on my phone, and what I've realized is that filtering app, it only works on the internet browser on there. And so I have my app store triggered to where I can't download those apps, and I only access the safest social media site that I have through the web browser, which is super annoying because it's super slow and it doesn't work super great.
Yeah.
But that's also another speed bump for me on it. And like, so I find a framework that it can work in. And if that framework starts to break down, then I have to make another choice to go, all right, what is the framework for this to work? And that may look like I'm off of this.
Yeah.
And what's amazing too is like the idea of staying connected. We access social media stuff through our phone, and I hear that those phones store numbers and we can call people through it. And I know it's not that easy on there.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
there's other ways to do it.
There's sacrifice there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're going to have to do a part 2 on this for sure, because there's a lot to unpack. But Andy, what do you say to someone that's wrestling, just even with those few things that we've covered? They're wrestling with being able to take this step to set boundaries. What would you say to encourage them in this space?
Yeah, I think just have the courage to be honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And asking yourself the question, what are the things that I am allowing in my life that could be bringing me to places that I don't want to go?
Yeah.
And if even there was a 10% chance that they could cause me to relapse, is that really worth it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up this one, and then we'll pick up with part 2 on boundaries. There's a lot to unpack here, but places, media, people, social media, those are ones we kind of address. And maybe I challenge you to be thinking about what's some things that you could just get you a paper and a pad and write down some of those things that become triggers for you in this space, so that you can prevent yourself from getting stuck in those spaces. So we may come back to a couple of these in our next podcast, but just continuing this conversation. This is about being proactive. We'll get to the reactive in a later podcast, but proactively, how can I set a boundary to keep myself out of the bad neighborhoods and out of that bad headspace where I'm in that lie and temptation and acting out that leads to hopelessness? Hey, I'm so glad that you joined us today. I hope this is helpful for you. I hope that you'll join us. And again, if you missed the previous podcast, go back and listen to that. But we're just trying to give you some real practical stuff to help you, to equip you, so that you can be all that God wants you to be in your life. And I hope this is helping you. But hey, thanks for being with us. Be sure to share this and give us a high rating. It helps us to reach more people. Thanks for being with us today. We hope you'll join us next time. Until then, God bless.